Good afternoon. Welcome to Robertson Genesis Live. This time for today is April the 22nd. Can't keep up with my dates here. Time rolls so fast. Yes, April 22nd. Welcome to, as you know, this program is set aside for you to give your comments on any topic whatsoever, and your questions also. Forgot that. And in my role as host of this program, I will endeavor to answer your questions or comment on your comments to the best of my ability using our Catholic faith, scripture, tradition, the fathers, the medievals, the popes, the councils, the saints, the doctors, the catechisms, encyclopedias, and just about anything I can find to help you walk away satisfied that your question has been answered. We come to you every Wednesday from 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now it's Eastern Daylight Time. And usually at the top of the program, we have some email questions that have come in during the week, as we do today. And I will answer them first in our session today. And we also have a chat room here where you can type in your questions. And the only two rules are put the word question in capital letters before your question, so I know it's a question. And let's be kind and loving and Christian-like to our fellow chat room members so that we don't have any squabbles going on. Not that it happens often. We have a good group of people that come here every week, so I'm not too worried about that. Just as a matter of saying, I'm probably so used to saying it, I probably will keep saying it. At any rate, is there anything, news items I have to? Just thinking about Donald Trump. And let me stop thinking about him and go on to our business of the day. Don't forget, we have the third day of how the world was made in 6 days. We have the third day done. 2.5 hours of just spectacular footage on day 3 of Genesis's creation week that unlike anything you've ever seen before. I can guarantee that nobody has made a film of the third day, or the second day or first day for that matter, or the fourth day like we have. And we stand alone, stand on the mountaintop. So it's well worth it, and well worth your, $19.95 is it? Something like that, in a DVD, or you can download it. So, let me see what else is there going on. We also have the Copernican Conspiracy, the 3-hour movie that I made. And we have Journey to the Center of the Universe, 4.5 hours of science and history. And all those are available at robertsongenesis.org. And somebody made an order of 48 of my 55 books the other day. Spent $2,000 on all hardback editions, and biggest sale we've ever had here. So I'm just encouraging you, if you want the best material available on God's green earth, in theology and science, that's the place to go. robertsongenesis.org. We also have a video that we put up called The Verse That Fooled Everyone. Is that the title of it? Something like that. Where Ted Cruz is having a discussion with Tucker Carlson. This is about 2 months ago. And he's trying to convince Tucker that Genesis chapter 12, verses 2 and 3, where God blesses Abraham and says, I bless you, and those that you curse, I will curse, and all that stuff. And he says, and that applies to the Jews. And Ted Cruz says to Tucker, he says, and I want to be on the winning side. I prefer to be on the Jewish side if that's the case, that people are going to be cursed if they don't bless the Jews. And he didn't even know where it was in the Bible, but I found it for him. And then I interpreted it the way it's supposed to be understood. And as a matter of fact, it doesn't say anything about the Jews. So will he be surprised when he sees our video? And it has, just after a couple of days put up, and it has already 21,000 views on it. So it became quite popular, and I expected to get quite higher. But it's just a 10-minute video. Explains the reasons why Mr. Cruz hasn't the slightest idea what he's talking about. And that's because he said he was taught this in Sunday school, that the Jews are special people, and if you bless them, you will be blessed. If you curse them, you will be cursed automatically, ipso facto. And that's what our Christian evangelicals have been raised on for the last 120 years. So ever since the Scofield Bible came out in 1909, and then it was republished in 1967, they have been raised on this idea that the Jews are special people, they deserve a special land, and all this kind of nonsense. So take a look at it. It's on YouTube, and we put some good quality into it. Okay, so let's get some of these email questions today. Okay, someone claimed to my friend, the book of Genesis does not claim to be a scientific book, textbook. To view it as such would quickly undermine itself with a simple question. Which came first, humans or plants? So he says, my friend says, I was asked to answer this question. He told me Genesis chapters 1 and 2 prove his point. What is the proper response to this? Oh, it's quite easy, because the answer to the question, which came first, humans or the plants? It's the plants, stupid. Why? Because what are the animals and the fish and the birds that are created on the 5th day and the animals that are created on the 6th day going to eat? They're not going to be eating each other, okay, because we're at the time before death. So they're going to be eating plants. And where are the plants going to come from if they're not there before the animals, the fish, and the birds come? Okay, so that's why Genesis chapter 1 puts the plants first on day 3, because the whole world is going to be filled with birds, fish, and other animals throughout the whole earth. Adam and Eve are going to be put in the Garden of Eden, and that's one small locale in the Middle East somewhere. But animals, fish, and birds are going to be put over the whole earth, you see. So that's quite an army to feed. And that's why plants have to be already in place for these new coming specimens so that they have something to eat. And they're going to be hungry. So that's the reason. I mean, it's really not a hard thing to understand. And he says Genesis 1 and 2 prove his point. I think what he is referring to there is the alleged contradiction between Genesis 1 and 2. Some people say, well, if the plants were made on the third day, well, then why does Genesis 2 say that the plants were made after Adam? Wow, what a toughie. It's simple, okay? The plants that are made on the third day are made for all the animals, fish, and birds everywhere in the world, okay? So that's what, 99% of the vegetation. But there's 1%, let's say 1% in the Garden of Eden that is going to have different plants for Adam and Eve than what the rest of the world has. As a matter of fact, there's different Hebrew words used for the plants that are going to be cultivated in the Garden of Eden. And as a matter of fact, they're so special that they have to be cultivated. The other plants that grow in the rest of the world, 99% of the rest of the world, are wild plants. You know, and they could be fruit trees, all kinds of trees to make a nest in, whatever the case may be. They're wild trees, and they grow wild and do wild things. And then there are special plants. And those are the plants that Adam and Eve are going to till. That's why Adam is going to till the garden, because they can't grow unless they're cultivated. You see, and then he has to have the proper amount of water. And the water God makes flow through the garden just right, proper humidity. Everything's going to be proper, okay? So there's no contradiction. What we have is two phases of plant making. One for the general population of the world, and the other for the Garden of Eden, okay? And those plants can only come after Adam is there to till the ground, right? All right, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, let's go on to the next question. Dear Robert, could you explain why, on the one hand, you have expressed a critical stance toward authoritative encyclicals, for example, Mulieris Dignitatem, while on the other hand, you maintain that we ought to accept the doctrinal note Materopuli Fidelis on the basis of its authority? All right, so if you guys don't know what he's talking about here, Mulieris Dignitatem was an encyclical that John Paul II wrote, I think, what was that, 1993 or 5, somewhere around there. And in there, he expressed the idea of mutual submission. Now, he didn't really define it all that well. In other words, is the kind of mutual submission he's talking about between husband and wife a legal issue, or is this just a practical issue? Unfortunately, he did not tell us which one he was talking about, if either. But that makes all the difference in the world. Okay, if he meant it on a legal basis, then you can flatly disagree with what he concluded, because there can never be a legal basis upon which the husband relinquishes his rule over his wife and his family. Okay, he is, legally speaking, he is always in charge of his family, whether he's away, whether he's sleeping, Whatever the case, he is in charge of his family in the legal sense of that word. Okay? That can never change. And that's the perspective from which Paul is saying in the New Testament that women, the wives, are to be in submission to their husbands in the legal sense. Okay? Now, that's very different from the practical sense. From the practical sense, even the husband knows he's not always in charge. Because if his wife asks him to take out the garbage, she's not really, pleading with him. It's like, honey, take out the garbage. And he, as a dutiful husband, is going to take out the garbage. So, and he's not going to say to her, well, hey, what are you talking about, woman? I'm the head of this household. Just go read the Bible and find out. You can't order me around. That marriage will last about 2 weeks, if that. Right? Now, he's going to take out the garbage. And he might do a lot more things around the house that the wife asks him to do. Okay? Why? Because they have a mutually beneficial relationship in which, even though the husband has legal authority, he's not going to lord it over his wife. They're going to come to some agreement. It's, who does this, who does that, all this kind of stuff. How do we raise the children? How do we spend money? Which trip do we go on? Which church do we go to? They're all going to be involved. Okay, that's practical living. And if that's the way John Paul meant the mutual submission in Mulieris Dignitatem, great. Okay, but he needed to make the distinction in the encyclical between legal submission and practical submission. And that would have solved all the problems, you see. And, we could go on and on about this, but that's basically what it's about. Then we have this other document by Francis Materopuli Fidelis on the issue of Mary and whether she is Co-Redemptrix or not. Okay. And that is saying no. Okay. This has been up in the air now for centuries. And Francis finally said, no, we're not making a doctrine that Mary is the Co-Redemptrix. Now, the Co-Redemptrix is a problem in itself because it's never been solidly defined, because there's the minimalist position and the maximalist position. The minimalist position says, yeah, Mary's Co-Redemptrix in the sense that without her, we would have no Savior. She brought Jesus into the world. Okay, and God chose to bring him in a natural way, born of a woman, not just by, snapping his fingers and Jesus is here. Okay, so if that's the case, then without her, there's no Savior, and that has theological implications, meaning that honor and respect should be given to Mary for the fact that she, of her free will, wasn't forced by God to do it. Of her free will, she said, yes, I will bear the Savior for the world. So that's the minimalist view of Mary's Co-Redemptrix position. Then there's the maximalist view, okay, where some people have said, well, it's more than that. Mary is taking part somehow, some way. They don't really say how she takes part in it, but somehow, some way, it's more than just being the mother of Jesus and bringing him into the world. It's because of, and this is where the mediatrix of all graces also comes in, because if she's the mediatrix, and by the way, we say mediatrix, that's the Latin for mediator. That's the female. Okay, so don't let that, bother you. Same with Co-Redemptrix. It's the Latin female for a co-redeemer. Where was I? The issue is, how do we define? Because you can only approve of a doctrine if it's properly defined. If the definition's all over the place between minimalist and maximalist, then you're going to have a problem. And it's better not to do anything. Okay? And there's no maximalist, although everybody agrees with the minimalist interpretation, because obviously Mary bore Jesus. There's no consensus on the maximalist interpretation, and there's no pope that ever made a doctrine of the maximalist position, wherein Mary is not just a co-redeemer in the sense that she took part in bringing Jesus in, but somehow she plays a part in our salvation. That without Mary, there wouldn't be salvation in the theological sense, not just the, historical sense of bringing Jesus into the world. And it gets kind of messy. It's like, well, what role could Mary have other than what Jesus did on the cross? Because the New Testament and all of Catholic history talks about the death of Jesus being what God the Father wanted for the atonement, and never nothing about Mary doing something extra for the atonement. This is a new idea, okay? And so is the mediatrix of all graces, that somehow Mary is more than just a conduit or a high value person that you can pray to have your prayers answered. Because the idea is the higher the value, higher the worth of the person that you pick for your being the mediator of your prayer between yourself and God, the better your chances of having your prayer answered. You see, that's the idea, and there's a lot of truth to that. Okay, but then the idea comes along where we say, well, it's more than Mary being worthy because she's the mother of God. It's that she is so special that every prayer that's answered has to go through Mary. Not that Mary's just the sort of person you want to pick to pray to, because, you could pray to St. Joseph, you could pray to St. Augustine, you could pray to St. Thomas, you could pray to St. Bernadette. There's a lot of people in heaven you can pray to. So if you don't choose Mary that day, it's not like a strike against you, okay? You decided to pray to somebody else, especially the saint that is in control of that particular thing that you're praying for, okay? Because if Mary has such scope wherein she is above everybody else as a mediator, then we'll just pray to Mary then. Don't bother praying to any of the saints. Now that's not going to happen, right? Okay, so we're just picking Mary because, Mary might be special to us that day. But to then say that no, Mary is so special that even if you don't pray to Mary, the grace of answering your prayer has to go through her. Okay, that's a little bit much. And that's why a lot of people in history have objected to that. Because you're making Mary something that you don't know Mary has. Because heaven's never revealed it to us. Heaven's never come down and said, oh, by the way, let's get it straight about Mary. Okay, she's co-redemptrix in the sense that she plays a part in the salvation of everyone, not just because she bore Jesus. Okay, never been given from heaven. And so it's the same with mediatrix of all graces, never been given from heaven. And I don't care what saints you quote, the saints are not given messages from heaven that Mary is more in the co-redemptrix or more in the mediatrix of all graces. Okay. Just hasn't happened. Nothing authoritative. We have a lot of opinions. Okay. Like Alphonsus Liguori has a lot of opinions. Okay. But there's nothing dogmatic that ever came out of what he said. Okay. So that all has to be considered. Now, so I personally of the opinion that Francis made the right decision, because this stuff is all still up in the air and heaven hasn't deemed to give us the definitive answer on it yet. Nothing has dropped from heaven. Somebody can point to and say, there it is. There it is. You've been waiting for it all this time. There it is, finally. Okay. Hasn't come. So, and I know other people, some of my friends are on the complete opposite side of me on this. And we would have some doozy arguments. Okay. But my objection you can probably understand Francis's decision a lot more. Okay. But here's the bottom line though. Okay. Somebody wants to know why I can criticize Mulieris Dignitatem and yet accept another encyclical and not think there's a contradiction. Well, not quite. Not quite. We can still disagree with Materopuli Fidelis. Okay? I can disagree with it if I want. All right? So I'm not favoring it. All right? And I can also agree with Mulieris Dignitatem. Okay? The issue here is if I criticize one, can I criticize the other? Certainly. I just don't criticize Francis's decree because I happen to agree with him on this issue. Okay? But that doesn't mean I can't change my mind and happen to disagree with him. Okay? So it's not like I'm trying to play one against the other or that my stance is contradictory, because you know what? I just laid out the reason why Mulieris Dignitatem's mutual submission is, I think, not good, which is why I disagree with it, because he didn't make the distinction between legal and practical in the encyclical. And that confuses everybody, because if they don't know which one you're talking about, then they can't really give their okay to it. So that encyclical needs to be improved. It's not that I'm against mutual submission in the sense that husband and wife are continually, mutually submitting to one another to make the marriage work. Because it's a hard job if you've ever been married. So you're going to find yourself sacrificing, giving, pleading in all kinds of ways when you're married, especially since you know this person like the back of your hand. And, you know, to get along, you're going to have a smile on your face all the time. And the way to get there is by knowing exactly what pleases your mate, because you're not going to be happy unless you do that. That takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of mutual submission. Oh, yeah. But never is there a time in that back and forth between husband and wife where the wife says, you know, I should be in charge. I should be, or we should have some mutual legal agreement where I make the decisions with you in the sense that I have just as much legal force as you do. That's wrong, you see, because the husband always has 100% of the legal authority in the family. Okay? And the cleric, pope, bishop, whatever, priest, always has the legal authority in the church. Always. There's no division of authority. But practically, that priest is going to work real hard in submitting to, the council and everybody else to get this church to work right. Oh, yeah, it's going to take a lot of work. Okay? So I hope that answers your question. All right, now we got a science question here. Okay. Dear Robert, since this issue keeps popping up and several parts are confusing to me, I wanted to finally ask everything that remained unclear. Feel free to answer in stream or by email. The first issue is that when talking about this, two things seem to get mixed up. On the one hand, the so-called Coriolis effect on Earth, but on the other, the Coriolis effect or / forces on the bodies of the rotating firmament. The first is very clear. The same relative movement has to result in the exact same forces, but the second not so much. When you describe the Coriolis force as inwards, what I find by looking it up is that it is perpendicular to velocity, changing the direction of a path relative to the rotating frame. This seems to match the examples with carousels, where Coriolis effect depends on how something behaves relative to the rotating movement. All right, so let me stop there and say this. So the Coriolis, yes, it is perpendicular, as you say, to the velocity. Now, centrifugal force is not dependent on velocity, okay? But Coriolis force is, so that makes it a little different. And you have to obey the equation. And the equation, the standard equation for force equals centrifugal plus Coriolis plus Euler force has V in the equation for Coriolis. Okay? So that means that the rotating universe has to have a velocity that can be measured by some standard. Otherwise, there won't be a Coriolis force. Okay? So now you can say that the velocity will be equivalent to however fast that circumference of the universe has to travel in a 24-hour period to start back at the beginning. Okay? And that, of course, is going to depend on the radius from the center where the Earth is. And that radius could be a lot of billions of miles away. Okay? So that means that circumference is going to be traveling pretty fast. But how do we really measure? How does the Coriolis force come to be if the velocity has to be out there? Okay. What is it going to be moving? In other words, it has to be moving against something. And this is where we come in with the constitution of the universe itself, the space that's out there in the universe. Remember, I have talked about this many times, that space is not empty. Space is full of something. It can't be empty because nothing doesn't exist. It has to be a something. Even though you can't see space, it's a something. It's made of something. Like, you say air, you breathe air. Can't see it, can you? No. But it's made of like a half a dozen elements, okay? Mostly nitrogen and oxygen. But you can't see it. Every square inch of the air has billions and billions of molecules of nitrogen and oxygen, some little helium here and there, little other inert elements, carbon dioxide a little bit, okay? But you can't see any of it. Same with space, out there in outer space. You can't see it, but it's made of something, okay? And quantum physics says that it's made of what we would think of as the smallest particle possible, and we call them Planck particles. I, in my books, call them planktons, just to give it a name. And that constitution of planktons constituting space is not moving. It's still with the Earth. And as a matter of fact, that's one of the things that keeps the Earth from not moving, because it's coordinated with the Planck particles, and the Planck particles are inside the Earth, okay, in their normal density. And as a matter of fact, that's what causes gravity, in my understanding. Because you got the Planck particles inside the Earth, and you got all the other things outside the Earth that are of a different density now, because they are not the same density as the Earth. And so there's going to be a vacuum created between the Earth itself and the particles above it. Whether it's, I don't know, it could be anything. Okay. And why is that? Well, that's because the Planck particles, the smallest particle available, permeates the universe. And that's why we say also in the first verse of Genesis, it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay. So the heavens, what constitutes the heavens? Well, it's going to have to be exactly what I'm saying. The constitution of the heavens is something substantive. And the only thing that can fit the bill is the smallest possible particle. And that's what quantum physics has told us is the Planck particle. Okay? Because if there's something smaller, then you can say, oh, see, you didn't fill all the space. There's something smaller. But we haven't even found that yet. Theoretically, we haven't even found it. Okay? So, if the Planck particle is, that is the constitution of the universe, is not moving and is in fact in line with the non-moving Earth and would be in line with the non-moving third heaven. So the third heaven, the constitution of the universe in the quantum particles, Planck particles, and the Earth are all not moving. Okay? So the first heaven and the third heaven are not moving. The basic constituency of the universe is not moving. So what is moving? Well, it's all that other stuff that's in the celestial sphere that's moving against this constitution of the universe, the Planck particles. So it would be hydrogen, all the planets, all the stars, all the suns, whatever is out there, galaxies, they're all moving against it. Okay? And that's how you measure the velocity that's needed for the Coriolis force. Okay? Because the starry skies are moving against the stationary universe, and you can measure that speed. So there's the V, the velocity needed in the inertial formula that everybody already knows. F equals centrifugal plus Coriolis plus Euler, you see. So that's how we would answer the first part of your question here. Okay, I hope it's understandable. Let me go on. It's not going to take too much longer. But if it is the centrifugal force pulling stars outwards, the direction relative to the rest of the rotating universe would just be outwards. So the Coriolis force would make the stars just have a perceived trajectory to the side. The next image illustrates what I mean. Okay, and he draws a picture. That would be a no. Okay. The reason why is because even though the Coriolis force tends to make the object, the moving object, go to the side, it looks like it's going to the side. Actually, if you get that in a laboratory and you do a test on the direction of the Coriolis force, this is what it will look like. It will go like this. It will end up at a point, continually curving. Because see, if it first starts to curve, then it's going to continue to curve. It's not going to go out like this and then just go to the right and keep going straight. That's not how it would work. Okay, that's more like the what the centrifugal force will do. That it's going to continue to go straight. Okay, but not the Coriolis force. It's actually going to be a corkscrew. Okay, and end up at a point. So you have a curved force, and we call it inward because it is moving inward. It's not moving outward somehow. It's moving inward. Okay. Now, here's what happens. If you combine that curved inward force with the centrifugal force, you're going to get a neutral position that creates a centripetal force. Now, I shouldn't say neutral position. You're going to neutralize the centrifugal force is what I should say. That will create a centripetal force. Okay. And what's the centripetal force? Well, that goes in toward the Earth. Okay. But if it's already moving in a curved space, in a curved line, then the centripetal force is going to be counterbalanced by the fact that it's already moving, and you're going to get a continual circle around the center of mass. Okay. So we've answered the Coriolis, the fact that it's a V factor, because it's moving against the whole universe that's still, okay, in the Planck particles. And then you don't have a side force with the Coriolis, you have a curved force, which is going to continue to give us the orbits of the planets against the sun, the stars against the Earth. Everything is going to continue to go in this circle, okay? Because that's basically what the Coriolis force is. And by the way, the Coriolis force in most instances is twice the magnitude of the centrifugal. So it's going to have no problem in dealing with the strong centrifugal force the farther out you go to the rim of the universe, because it's going to be twice as strong no matter where the centrifugal force shows up. And it's going to be able to hold it back, because if it didn't, then the stars would all go to the rim of the universe. Okay, so yeah, definitely we have to deal with that. And the way we deal with it is the Coriolis force. And by the way, this is not something that I'm making up. Okay. Here is Albert Einstein on the very question. Okay. And he's writing to Ernst Mach back in the early 1900s. And he says to Mach, "Your happy investigations on the foundations of mechanics," this is physics, "Planck's unjustified criticism notwithstanding, will receive brilliant confirmation, for it necessarily turns out that inertia originates in a kind of interaction between bodies, quite in the sense of your considerations on Newton's pail experiment." Now that's dealing with a controversy that's still alive today about how inertia works, where it comes from, and all that. The first consequence is on page 6 of my paper. Now, here's the important part. The following additional points emerge. If one accelerates a heavy shell of matter S, Then a mass enclosed by that shell, so here's the mass, and the shell is enclosing it, okay, experiences an accelerative force. Okay, the mass, here's a shell, it's going to experience a force, the mass is. If one rotates the shell, here's the shell, relative to the fixed stars, okay, the fixed stars are in here, about an axis going through its center, the center of this mass, a Coriolis force arises in the interior of the shell, right here. That is the plane of a Foucault pendulum is dragged around. Okay? Now, this is general relativity's conception of a geocentric universe. The mass is the Earth. The shell is the universe. The stars are inside. And he says, if you rotate the shell, you create a Coriolis force inside the shell that will do what? It will turn the Foucault pendulum on the Earth. Okay? So here you have Einstein admitting that relativity must agree that the Earth can be still and the universe turns, and as it turns, it makes a force, the Coriolis force, that makes the Foucault pendulum turn. Whereas the explanation for why the Foucault pendulum turns among heliocentrists is just because the Earth is moving, okay, in the fixed, and the stars don't move, the universe doesn't move, just the Earth turns, and that makes it look like the Foucault pendulum is turning. Two completely different explanations. But what I want you to see is that Einstein himself said that the one where the Earth stands still and the universe moves, yeah, that's just as likely to happen, to be the explanation for why the Foucault pendulum moves. Okay? Now, he's not going through all this Planck particle thing that I am, but I'm just trying to do that to show you that we're obeying the same equation that the heliocentrists are by recognizing the V, the velocity, in the equation for inertial forces. Now, here's another guy, Andrew Asis, who wrote a book called Relational Mechanics, and he's a famous physicist down in South America, Brazil, I believe. One of my friends went down there to visit him one time. And he says this: the diurnal rotation of distant masses around the Earth. Now, what is that? Diurnal rotation is these masses, these stars, rotate around this Earth once per day. That's what diurnal means. Okay? With a period of 1 day. Yields a real gravitational centrifugal force flattening the Earth at the poles. Okay? So he's saying, if you get this universe to turn, all the inertial forces and the gravity in that turn is going to cause the Earth to flatten so that it looks like the Earth isn't a sphere. It's just more pear-shaped, you see, because the poles are brought together more. Okay? Foucault's pendulum is explained by a real Coriolis force acting on moving masses over the Earth's surface in the equation -2m blah, 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 blah. And that is the velocity of the test body relative to the Earth, is the angular rotation of the distant masses around the Earth. The effect of this force will be to keep the plane of oscillation of the pendulum rotating together with the fixed stars. Same thing that without going into detail about this, it's the same thing that Einstein said. Okay? And all the physicists out there know this. This is nothing new. I can give you 24 physicists who have said the same thing. Okay? But that's where they leave it. Even the guy, Andrew Asis, that I just read, Well, we asked him, well, would you ever consider geocentrism? No. No, I can't do that. You see, why can't he do it? Because he'd lose his position as a professor at the university he teaches at. Okay? Because now you're getting into politics. You're leaving science and you're getting into politics. That's what's not going to let you say that the sun and stars go around the earth every day. Yeah, that's what it's all about. Okay? That's the real world. So, excuse me. All right. So, let me see what else we have here. Let's try this one. Perhaps you can try to settle, dear Dr. Sagetis, perhaps you can try to settle a friendly dispute. A friend of mine believes that the gift of tongues is still in effect today. However, that female head coverings were only for the first century Corinthian congregation. I say just the opposite, primarily because of 1 Corinthians 13:8 regarding tongues shall cease, and 1 Corinthians 11, where Paul appeals to creation, apostolic authority, etc., as the argumentation for head coverings. Can you email me back or speak to this on the program? Thank you for your ministry. Have a blessed day. Okay, so yeah, gets to be a touchy area with people, because the first time that the Catholic Church looked the other way, let's put it that way, looked the other way when women started to not wear head coverings. And mind you, they were wearing head coverings. You can find pictures of women in churches, big and small, wearing head coverings right up to the early 1960s. Okay. And a lot of them were wearing hats at that time. Some still wearing veils, but a lot of had transitioned into hats because that was a little bit more modern, understandable. But they were still wearing them. And then you had Vatican II. And Vatican II didn't say anything about head coverings, not one word. But you had a bishop there. What's his name? Bishop, the guy who was the author of the Novus Ordo. What's his name? Bonini. Bishop Bonini. Bungini, I think is how you spell it. Anyway, he was interviewed by the press, and the press asked him if the issue of women's head coverings was going to be dealt with at Vatican II. And he gave some vague answer that implied that it was going to be addressed and that it was going to be a difference in what we I have his exact words written down somewhere, and probably in my book, as I wrote a book about this, about head coverings for women. Are they required? Okay. And he gave some vague answer, and so the press took the ball and ran with it and saturated the newspapers with, positive statements about women not having to wear head coverings any longer after Vatican II was over. And so there started to be, it just took on a life of its own. And women started to stop wearing head coverings. little by little. So by the time you get to the 70s, they're practically gone. It's not even an issue anymore. And the church hadn't said one official word about it at all. It was just a casual statement. That's about the best we can do for it with Bunini, that it might be looked at and might be changed. You know, that's all you got to say to the press. And they're like, yeah, it's going to change, you know. So that's what happened. That is how it happened. And so it took on a life of its own. And by that time, the 1960s, my goodness, things were changing so rapidly from the post-World War II era to this new whatever it was happening. Nobody really knew what was going on, but things were falling apart left and right. And the Vietnam War and the druggies and the hippies and the yippies and it was terrible. So in the midst of all this commotion, women stopped wearing head coverings at Mass. And it was like natural, you know. The only official statement that was made during that era was in 1976 in the CDF statement. It wasn't even written by the Pope. The CDF statement called, what's the name? Inter something. I forget the name of it. But Pope Paul made a statement about, it's been so long since I've covered this. He made a statement about women being under the authority of man, or it was like the whole understanding of what a woman was and how she was to act. And he made this statement that, and you know, women used to wear head coverings. And that was the only official statement that the church ever said on head coverings. You know, women used to wear head coverings. And people took that like it was dogma that women no longer had to wear head coverings. And anybody who knows how the church is supposed to deal with doctrine knows that any ancillary statement somebody makes while they're making comments about some other issue are not valid as a doctrinal basis for starting a new doctrine. I mean, just because, well, you know, women used to wear head coverings, and that can't be the basis now for doing away with head coverings because the Pope made some obvious statement about what's occurring. Okay. But that was the only official in any official document, 1976. And so the next incident would be the 1983 Code of Canon Law that John Paul II made, which, in contrast to the 1917 Code, does not mention any requirement for women to wear head coverings. And so a lot of people made a conclusion, well, if it does not include it, then that means you just don't have to do it. No. Okay. Because if you read the 1983 code, it says if something is not mentioned from a previous code, it does not mean that it is not required any longer. It says that right in the code, I think about 3 times. Yeah, I wrote a long paper on this. So you can't use that. That's like an argument from silence. Well, it doesn't mention it, so that means we don't have to do it. No, you can't do that. Not with Code of Canon Law. Why? Well, because the 1983 code respects the 1917 code and every other code before it that did require head coverings. So its absence doesn't mean that the church now totally denies that it ever existed or that it wasn't worth its salt then, and it's certainly not going to be now, blah, blah, blah. You can't make those conclusions, okay? Especially when you're dealing with customs that are 100 years or older. And wearing head coverings is certainly one of those. So it says, and it says in many other ways that you just can't overturn a dictate from a previous code just because the other code doesn't mention it. Can't do that. That means the whole thing has to be adjudicated by itself. But you know how things happen. You know, this little weakness here, and this weakness here, and this weakness here. You add those all together and you got a big weakness. And that means women are going to continue to do what they did from the late 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And now it's like you're weird if you wear a hat or a veil at Mass. You're ancient. You're a dinosaur. You get all kinds of stigmas for that. Okay. So, but there's been no dogmatic statement by the church saying women do not have to wear veils or head coverings any longer. Okay. Now, why am I going through all this? Well, because if your claim is that the head coverings only apply to the first century, whereas tongues is a continual gift to be given and should never end, you got problems because the Catholic Church, right up until the 20th century, were requiring veils for women. That means all previous 20 centuries, women were wearing veils because they were required by the church to do so. And when they stopped wearing veils, it was in a total confusion of who was saying what and who had the authority. Well, nobody was saying what. That's the problem. There was no dogmatic statement given, but they were surely practicing it. Okay. So that means it is a doctrine with longevity, 20 centuries worth. Okay. So that's number one. Number two is tongues. Yes. Scripture does say, 1 Corinthians 14:39, do not forbid to speak with tongues. Okay. That applies to all time. Nobody's going to stop tongue speaking if it's legitimate. But that's the problem with tongues. Because they even had the problems of legitimacy of tongues in the first century, in the First Corinthian church. Yeah, the chapter 14 of 1 Corinthians is a chapter basically all about judgment for those who aren't obeying the rules of prophecy and tongue speaking, which consumed a lot of the Corinthian church. Yeah, they were faking tongues. It's easy to fake tongues because nobody's supposed to know the language you're speaking. So you can go talk in any gibberish. And somebody might, well, that's a language, well, this sounds like it's from heaven. You could say anything you want. Not that there weren't legitimate tongues being spoken. Okay. That happened at Pentecost. It happened with Cornelius. It happened with the Ephesians. And of course, it's going to happen in the churches. But Paul says, beware. Somebody gets a hold of a gift like that, where they can basically fake out the whole congregation and show themselves to be somewhat holy. And man, we got the gift of God. Glory to be. And I can speak in tongues and everybody knows that I'm special. And oh man, the temptations for that. Whew. Oh yeah. And I mean, Paul gives the severest warning against fake tongue speaking by quoting from Isaiah and Jeremiah, where it says, "And I will come to you speaking other tongues." And you look at the context of those passages, and they're talking about God sending the Babylonians against Judah for her apostasy. Yeah. And the Assyrians against the 10 tribes for their apostasy. I mean, it's not light. It's not a light warning at all. Okay. So that's what Paul's contending with in the Corinthian church. People taking tongues under their own power and making it up because it's easy to make up. Hey, we've had that in Catholicism. We've had some legitimate tongue speakers. Ignatius of Loyola, a couple of other saints that had to have foreign languages of the people that they were preaching to, but they didn't know the language. And God gave them the gift of tongues to speak in these foreign languages for these people to understand the gospel. That's happened several times in Catholic history. But then we got the fake tongue speakers. And that started with the Protestants in the 1900s. What was her name? Agnes Goodman. Yeah, a woman. And here's another thing about tongues. 85% of modern tongue speakers are women. And in 1 Corinthians 14, Paul said women aren't even allowed to speak in the church, much less speak in tongues. Yeah, that's 1 Corinthians 14, 33 and 34. Okay? So we got problems. And then you had the Catholics fall. At this point in time, Catholics and Protestants were in high ecumenical meetings, trying to make amends for the past and, exchanging doctrines and practices and all that. So by the 1960s, that tumultuous 10-year period where everything was changing faster than you could keep a look at it, we had whole universities. Notre Dame University. What was the other one? Duquesne University. Stadiums filled with people, college students, speaking in tongues. It sounded like a zoo. Everybody making up their tongues. And it transferred to a lot of other universities, and you had all the major Protestants coming and leading the Catholics and teaching them how to speak in tongues and all this stuff. And then you had healings and, miracles supposedly done. And then it died out. By the late 1970s, nobody was speaking in tongues anymore. Just a few, stragglers here or there, which you always get. But that was it. Why? Because it wasn't doing anything for them. Yeah. See, they were all into it. They didn't realize that they were being deceived by being taught to speak in tongues. Come on. And there's a whole psychology behind that. Okay. I did the research on this. There's at least a dozen psychologists who have examined tongue speaking. They can tell you right where it comes from in the human mind and why it does and all that. So yeah, you can say on the one hand, tongues has never been taken away, okay, in a formal way. Because Paul said, forbid not to speak in tongues. And we've had some saints use tongues to minister the gospel to different peoples of different lands, so it can be useful. Okay? But the devil knows that too. And that's why it can be disrupted all the way from the first century to our century. And it still happens today. Okay. So, and then you have to deal, as Jason said here, you have to deal with the fact that 1 Corinthians 13:8 says, if there be knowledge, it shall fail. If there be prophecy, it shall be fulfilled. If there be tongues, they shall cease. Okay, so we have to fulfill that. When did tongues cease? Tongue shall cease. And it's the different verb form for knowledge and prophecy. Paul uses the word katergeo, which means shall be set aside. They won't be needed anymore. But for tongues, he says, they shall cease, and the Greek word there is palomai, which means, and it's in the middle voice, and that means it shall stop by itself. Within itself, it will. There will be no real need for it. So it will just cease because of uselessness, so to speak. And that's pretty much what happened. Because if you go and examine the fathers of the church and what they say about tongues, it's unanimous, especially among the later fathers. It's unanimous that the churches aren't speaking in tongues. Nobody's speaking in tongues. It died a long time ago. Yeah, probably after the 1st century. Died all by itself. Just wasn't needed. Okay? That's the testimony of the fathers. The medievals say the same thing. Except for these little issues where, the saint preaching the gospel needed to speak in tongues. And that shows us that God still allows it. But on the larger scale, on the mass scale, what was tongues doing? Well, it went out of business. Okay. And so we know that from history. Okay. So it wasn't continuing on a mass scale like it was at Pentecost and other places. It died off, except in very exceptional places. Okay. So you have a different story than you do with head coverings, because nobody was contesting head covering. And of course, that wasn't causing a ruckus in the church. Head coverings, all you have to do is put a thing on your head to show you're in submission to your husband. Who was going to argue with that? Not in those days. Maybe in the modern era, yeah, fits like a glove with the women of today not to wear a head covering, because most of them don't want to be in submission to their husbands. And if it is, they're going to go for mutual submission without even knowing what that means. Okay? That is separating the legal from the practical, as I said. All right. So I hope I've given you a good argument. Okay, there's 2 other questions here about the political context of the Gospels in Rome and all that. So we'll get to that next time. And Muslims claim that Ishmael is the progenitor of the Arabs. Is that true or false? We'll deal with that next time too. All right. So let's get to the all right. Where is everybody today? This thing is usually filled to the brim. All right. Okay, when you say general relativity allows any speed, are you referring to coordinate speeds in curved spacetime or actual locally measured speeds of objects with mass? Well, the way that general relativity wants to allow it is to say, yeah, coordinate speed in curved spacetime. Okay. But the fact is, they allow any speed. That has to be given as the substance that it's worth. So it's not just 186,000 miles a second in your coordinate curved spacetime. Okay? So when you say that the limit is drawn out by special relativity to 186, that's only in an inertial frame. You have to say that. I don't care what else you say about coordinate speeds and curved spacetime to make up for the fact that in a non-inertial frame, special relativity has no authority. Okay? You see, and this is the problem with relativity. You got all these exceptions to the rules. Well, that's a special coordinate frame or curved spacetime. And it hasn't even defined what that is. I mean, it's just mathematical equations. Okay? First, give me a good definition of space-time. What's that? Well, that's just a concept that you have space and you have time, and we'll just make it one term. And we'll every time we talk about what's out there, we'll just say space-time. Oh, well, that's convenient. Okay? Why? Because the equations of general relativity are going to depend on coordinating, space and time together. And so instead of having just three Euclidean dimensions, you now add a fourth dimension, time, because that makes all the difference is how these dimensions are going to coordinate with one another. But it's all mathematics. You can't show me space-time out there. Okay? All I see is space. Yeah, and I can look at my watch and I see time, but how they're coordinated, that's all figured out in an equation. But it doesn't make it right. Just because you can have space-time and curved space-time and all this doesn't make it right. Okay? I mean, the whole concept of Einstein's gravity is what? That the mass doesn't pull in the moon that's out here. It pulls in the space around the moon so that the moon stays close to the Earth. Okay. And now what Newton had done was say, well, no, it doesn't pull into space because the space is absolute. Space can't move. So it has to pull in the moon, you see, not the space. So you got two completely different concepts of gravity between Newton and Einstein. And the science world treats it like, but it's the big deal, you see? Because if you don't even understand how gravity works, okay, because you can't prove that a mass pulls in space. How are you going to prove that? You can't. So it's all a concept, and then you get the concept and you put an equation to it. And once you put an equation to it, everybody goes, wow, it's got an equation. It must be right. No, it just means it's got a concept that he thought of putting in an equation. So instead of saying 2 plus 2, he says 3 plus 1. Okay? So Newton said 2 plus 2. Einstein says 3 plus 1. But neither of them really know what causes gravity. And that's the crux of the whole issue. Because gravity is a non-inertial frame. And that's what makes light speed go faster than 186,000 miles a second in a non-inertial frame. Well, if you don't even know how gravity works, then how can you start telling us about, well, it only applies in coordinate speeds and curved space-time and all that stuff? Yeah. Okay, I hope you get the drift of what I'm saying. But all we need to do is point to the fact that at least some textbooks will admit it, that light has to go faster. Now, because we just talked about Einstein's universe in general relativity, where he has to support a geocentric universe. And what does he say? He says, well, if the mass is not rotating and the shell is rotating around it on a diurnal basis, then it's going to create inertial forces inside the shell that are going to affect how things move on the mass that's not moving. Well, that's geocentrism. Okay? So if that's the case, then you're going to have to explain to us how this shell can move around in one day. How do you do that? Well, it all depends on the coordinate system, and the curved space and how you adjust all those. You see, general relativity, the generalness of general relativity requires him to give us a geocentric universe. And so he has no problem in saying, well, if the shell goes around, it's going to create a Coriolis force. Okay? Explaining how that happens, or how that can happen, in a world that he said cannot go faster than 186,000 miles a second, well, that's going to take some doing, isn't it? So you're going to have to be adjusting your parameters in your equations to make it fit. That's all he does. Look, they ran into this problem with the speed of light that Einstein said had to be the case in 1905. And remember, he invented that. Why? Because Michelson-Morley showed that the Earth wasn't moving. And in order to keep the Earth moving around the sun, well, we have to say that the speed of light is limited to 186,000 miles a second. That's where it all came from. Okay? So, having that in mind as the motivation for why they do all this stuff, they invented the Big Bang. And remember, they invented the Big Bang. Why? Because Hubble saw that the Earth was in the center of the universe and didn't want it there. So we create a Big Bang to get away from that. Yeah, that happened 13 billion years ago, right? But we ran into a problem. And the problem was that in order to get a universe this size that we can see today in 13 billion years, it's going to take some speeding up of the mechanism that we say caused the Big Bang. Oh, yeah. As a matter of fact, we're going to have at least 95% of that Big Bang completed in 1/26 of a second or less. We'll call that inflation. It just sort of popped into being, inflated all of a sudden. In less than the time that it takes to wink your eye, it's there, and then it starts growing, you see. Then we have the 13 billion year process. And that gives us enough time for evolution, and all that kind of stuff. So you had a big problem because if the explosion can only occur at 186,000 miles a second, we're going to be here for 500 billion years waiting for the first monkey to arrive. Okay? Can't have that. We got to get this thing over with. So that's the first problem they had. And now they got another problem, because now they found out that their accelerating universe is going so fast, it's going 4 times the speed of light. Well, wait a minute. How can that be? You told us that light can only go 186,000 miles, and it's the fastest thing. It's like a cheetah of the animal world. Nobody can go faster than a cheetah. Okay? And now you're telling us that the universe is going 4 times faster than a cheetah does. Well, how can that be? Well, it's not really the universe, it's the space that's created as it expands. Really? You're serious, right? So they have some big problems. All right, let's move on. In Genesis 31:13, why does the angel call himself the God of Bethel? Okay, well, let's look at that. Let me see. What do we got here? Oh. Genesis 31:13. Okay. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar, where you vowed a vow to me. Now rise up, get out of this land, and return to your land and kindred. Well, it first speaks of the angel of God in verse 11. Let's just start reading from verse 9. And God has taken away the livestock of your father and has given them to me. And at that time the flock was in heat. I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream, and behold, the rams which leaped on the flock were striped, speckled, and mottled. And the angel of God spoke to me in a dream, Jacob. And I said, I am here. And he said, lift up your eyes and see all the rams that are leaping on the flock. They are striped, speckled, and mottled, for I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar, where you vowed a vow to me. Now rise up, get out of this land, and return to the land of your kindred. Okay, now let's see if the it says in Hebrew, Enoke ha'al, and that's where the God comes from. Okay, so it's the El is the word for God there, and then ha'el is the God. So the God of Bethel, that's Bethel. Eshar, where Mashakat, where you anointed. Sham, there. Metzbah, the pillar. Okay, so it does say God. Now, the angel could be speaking for God. Okay, because we have there, we have God wrestling with Jacob, and a lot of times in the Old Testament you can't tell because the language is probably written that way. You can't tell the difference between the angel of God and God. Okay, and this may be one of those times where the angel is pointing to a previous event that happened in Bethel, and he's basing his future answer to Jacob upon what happened in the past. Okay, so I would say that it would be the angel, because the angel's in the context already talking to Jacob, and he's explaining to Jacob what his dream meant, why he had the dream, and all that. And as a matter of fact, it says in verse 11, Malach, that's the angel. And then the next would be Ha'elohim. It's Elohim with the verb, with the article in front of it. So it's Ha-Elohim. I am the God. I am the angel of God. So because it's in the context, I would say it's the angel. Okay, to make it very simple. All right. Okay. When Christ gave authority to all the apostles in Matthew 18:18, is this to be understood as him giving them all the keys, or is this giving them authority through Peter? Yeah, the only one who receives the keys is Peter, and that's in Matthew 16. Okay, Jesus, as a matter of fact, when Jesus says, I give you the keys, that is a Greek singular. Okay, and that's significant because that means the keys only go to one person. I give you the keys. As a matter of fact, all the yous there are singular Greeks. So that's how the Catholics know that he's talking to Peter and Peter alone. He's the guy, whoever has the keys has the ultimate authority. Okay. And then the rest of the people, apostles, share in that authority, but their authority is limited by whatever the keys say. Okay. So it all works out very well together. Yeah. This is why councils, which are very similar to like the apostles, they are dogmatic. They can make infallible statements, but unless they're ratified by the Pope, they have no effect. They're not a legal document, okay, or a canonical document. They must be ratified by the Pope. So, I mean, and the Pope, of course, can make a dogma himself. He doesn't need the apostles. Ex cathedra. Doesn't do it often, but he can. So everything is revolving around Peter. That's why having a pope is so important. And I think that answers your question. Loved your video on Ted Cruz and Genesis. A must watch and share. Yeah, I wish I had the link to that for you. I just don't. But look under the verse that fooled millions or something like that. Yeah, the verse that fooled millions. Okay, question. Is current Judaism a fake rejectionist religion created 90 AD in Yavne without temple redemption by Levite priesthood? Cohen and Aaron descendants as required for Mosaic temple sacrifice. Yeah, I mean, the temple sacrifices were halted right when Jesus died on the cross, if you remember. The temple and the curtain in the temple was torn in two the moment that he died, the second that he died. And then you can hear this big, because the temple curtain was like from ceiling down to the floor, and it was you can just imagine what that sounded like. But that's when it stopped. Okay. So Judaism is what you would call a continuation of what was left of the religion of the Old Testament during the Maccabee period and onward. Okay. They got together the remnants of it and continued to practice, because most of these people didn't know what was going on. They had no idea why Jesus Christ was here. If they did, they would have believed him and followed him, and they wouldn't get caught up in trying to restore Judaism. But this is what's to be expected. You're going to get the people that have no idea what's happening, and they're just going to continue their practices the way they think they should be done. And, so they're going to do so. And even when they're cast out of Jerusalem by the Romans in 70 AD and 136 AD, and they were sent off to Babylon, they still practiced the Judaistic religion as much as they could. The remnants that were left to them, they practiced it, and they made up a lot as they were going along. And that's where the Babylonian Talmud comes in, because that was made in 600 AD. And that was made when they were in Babylon, in the area of Iraq. And they were there for 1,000 years. And then they started to migrate to southern Russia, Khazaria area, and stayed there for a few hundred years, and then migrated to Eastern Europe. Okay. So, and each, place where they stopped off is going to have remnants of the Judaistic religion. It's just natural, but it's not real. I mean, it's not God ordained. Let's put it that way. It's not God ordained. That stopped when Jesus died on the cross. Okay? All right. Oh, somebody says, remember to leave a like on the stream and share with your friends. Yes, that's for the video, I guess, and for this program. Why not? How do you resolve the difference in genealogies between Genesis 11 and Luke 3? Well, Genesis 11, uses the word beget. So-and-so begat so-and-so. So the first thing we're going to realize is that not every beget is necessarily a father-son relationship. Most likely it is, because that's what beget normally means. Yalad is the word. And you can look up every reference to Yalad, and you won't find one that doesn't imply or require a father-son relationship. Okay? And so then you come to Luke, 3:36, which says that there is, between the beget of Shelah and Arphaxad, there is Cainan, which is very interesting. So Genesis 11 and 12 don't have Cainan. That's in Luke 3:36. And it says, and Luke 3:36, if I remember correctly, says, and Arphaxad begat Cainan, and Cainan begat Shelah. Okay. But Genesis 11 says Arphaxad begat Shelah. So I think what God's trying to tell us there is that if you're trying to form a chronological genealogy based on Genesis 5 and 11, you've got to use caution, because I'm showing you an instance where there is a person between two people in Genesis 11, which may mean that there could be more. Okay. But Luke's not mentioning them. Possible. It's possible. What you do know for sure is that there is a person between Arphaxad and Shelah of Genesis 11. So you got to be careful in the way you interpret that. Is that a father-son relationship? Well, according to Luke 3:36, you have another person involved. So it's a grandson, grandfather relationship in Genesis 11. You got to take that into account. So now, and the Septuagint makes it even, more serious, because it includes Cainan in its genealogy of Genesis 11. Okay. Now the Septuagint is not inspired. Okay. And so the preference would go to the Masoretic text over the Septuagint in looking at the genealogy of Genesis 11. Okay. And the Septuagint has quite a few differences other than the Cainan issue. Like, it adds 100 years to a lot of the patriarchs in the Genesis 5 and 11 genealogy. It's like, where's that coming from? 100 years? Oh my gosh. So you can see why this stuff is hard. Okay. It's hard to reach a resolution. Like, when was Adam created? Usher can say, well, 404 BC, all that. Yeah, but he's not taking into account any of these anomalies that I'm mentioning here. Okay. So you can't be sure. And that's why the fathers are all over the place on dating Adam. We've got Julius Africanus is out there at 5500 BC. Okay, and the rest of them are less than 5,000 years. So it's like, somewhere in there is the truth. That's what we know. Okay, but sorting it all out is something that we haven't figured out yet. I mean, we basically came to a date of 931 for the foundation date from which we can start dating events in the Old Testament only recently, within the last 50, 70 years or so. Okay. So it's not been easy. All right. Question: how does Lateran 4 prove creationism? Well, it doesn't prove creationism. Let's be clear about that. And because for proof, you're saying that there is no other solution, there's no other possibility, and that's something unreachable, practically speaking. So let's be clear about that. And Lateran 4 does not, and this goes for Vatican I, because it just repeated what Lateran 4 said. Only it used a couple of more words that Lateran 4 didn't use. But Lateran 4 never says there are 6 days. That's the problem. It says God created out of nothing, and it said he did so immediately, ex nihilo, all that. But it doesn't say in 6 days. That's a problem. Okay. So, although it proves that creation got here by ex nihilo action of God, it left open that other wide category that needs to be filled, and that's the word 6 days. So that's the problem with Lateran 4. Vatican I is the same problem. Doesn't say 6 days. It just says God created out of nothing the material and the spiritual, angels, men, all that. Uses the same language as Lateran 4. And it says, it adds, what's the words that it adds? Of substance. Whole substance. It made them whole substance. Now, the philosophers like to take the word substance and say, well, that refers to, the accident substance paradigm from Thomas and all that kind of stuff. Maybe. I don't remember Thomas using the words whole substance to describe that paradigm. I just remember him using substance. Because if you say whole substance, then you're implying that there may be substances that are in parts. But they don't believe substance is in parts. Okay? So why use the adjective whole? The reason may be because it refers to something else. Like when you say whole substance, you're talking about the whole animal, the whole tiger, a whole elephant, a whole man, that it didn't come in parts. Okay? First a molecule, and then something else, and then something else. It wasn't built in parts, it was built in whole substance. Adam came as a complete atom. Eve, when she was created from the rib, was created a whole Eve. Whole. That's whole substance. That's what Vatican I adds. They were created in whole substance. So I beg to differ with the philosophers on that one. But it doesn't say 6 days. Okay. And see, Lateran 4 has an excuse because it wasn't in a time where they were discussing the benefits of evolution, in the 1400s. Nobody was talking about evolution. In the 1800s, when Vatican I was here, oh yeah, everybody was talking about evolution. Okay. So if there's anybody that should have given us firm conviction that the universe was created in 6 literal days, it should have been Vatican I, because they were right in the midst of those debates. I mean, Darwin had written his book, Origin of Species, within 10 years of Vatican I. Okay? It was a hot topic. So with that, that's always been a problem. And then you have the Pontifical Biblical Commission in 1909 under Pius X, who was writing all kinds of things against modernists and liberals, how they were taking the Bible apart and not interpreting it literally and stuff. And instead of, the questions posed to the Pontifical Biblical Commission, whether we should interpret the word day in Genesis 1 as a 24-hour day or not. Perfectly legitimate question. And instead of giving an answer, which they should have, they kept the ball rolling for the evolutionists by saying, well, you can look at it as a 24-hour day. That's okay. But you can also look at it as a certain period of time. So more or less than a 24-hour day. Exegetes can do that. So it's saying exegetes, if they disagree, if some want to interpret as 24 hours, that's okay. If some don't want to interpret as 24 hours, that's okay too. So they didn't answer the question. They just made it more ambiguous for everybody. You can do this, you can do that. Just don't fight about it. And that just was a disaster. Absolute disaster. So it gave Teilhard de Chardin every excuse he needed to shun Genesis as just a folklore. Okay? Whereas all the other Catholic theologians, from Augustine to Aquinas to Robert Bellarmine, all said, 24-hour days. Now, the Pontifical Biblical Commission didn't say they couldn't do that. Okay, so it's not rejecting a literal 24-hour period, but it didn't make it secure. That's for sure. So, we have to put up with that to this day. All right, I should go on here. Should the center of mass of a system be near the object with the greatest mass? In our universe, how can we explain the center of mass being on Earth, which doesn't have a very large mass? Okay, good question. Because your center of mass is basically a hypothetical point. Okay. And you don't need mass to have a hypothetical point. The center of mass is something as small as you want to make it. No limit to how small it can be. Because you could say, well, this ball is the center of mass for this big sphere I have. But inside that ball, you can cut that down and have a center of mass of the center of mass. Okay. And you can get down to the smallest possible point that's going to be your center of mass. And that little sphere is going to maneuver itself around that center of mass. Okay. So you don't need mass to have a center of mass. Okay. The mass, the center of the mass is the universe. That's the mass. And the center of it is that distinct point upon which every mass in the universe is going to pivot around. Okay. Based on force. So, you start with the center of mass of the universe, and then you can put something in that place. And that can be the Earth. It could be Jupiter. It could be Alpha Centauri. And whatever is put in that center of mass, that hypothetical center of mass, is not going to move. And that's what the Bible says is the Earth. It does not move. And the only way that that can be coordinated with modern physics or even classical physics is that it has to be centered around the center of mass. The Earth has to occupy. The Earth's center of mass has to occupy the center of mass of the universe. They coordinate. Okay? That's basically what we're saying. Okay? Now, 2GBP here, I don't know what that is, so somebody's going to have to tell me. We got 5 minutes left. Question: if both models can fit the data, but one does it in a much simpler and more natural way, what reason is there to choose the more complex geocentric explanation? Well, because you're assuming that the geocentric is the more difficult one. From our perspective, it's the simpler one. You got one unmoving point, everything else revolves around it. How much simpler can you be? Okay? In your system, you've got the Earth, which has to rotate on an axis and go around the sun. So you got two movements. So that's more complicated, isn't it? Right? Then you got the sun that's got to go around the galaxy and carry the Earth and the planets with it. Through that, there's another movement you have. It takes 250 million years. And then you have the galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, that has to go around a whole other set of galaxies, which takes, then that's another movement, isn't it? And then that cluster has to go around another cluster, and that's another movement. Okay, so you got a lot of movement going on in your little system there. Okay, not ours. You got motionless Earth, and the whole universe is going around and carries everything with it. Simple. As a matter of fact, in our system, let's say in your system, you've got a moving Earth rotating in this gargantuan universe with all kinds of gravitational and inertial forces. You got gravity of the moon, the sun, the planets, and any other stray gravity you have from all the 10 to 22nd stars that are out there. Okay. And they all cause perturbations in how things move in the solar system. Then you have all the earthly forces. You have earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanoes, tidal forces twice a day, meteors, asteroids, blah, blah, blah. There's like a dozen different forces all converging on the Earth to stop that rotation of 23 hours, 56 minutes, 4.09 seconds per day. Yeah. That's why evolutionists believe that the Earth rotated twice as fast millions of years ago, because the rules of inertia are going to say it's got to slow down. With all those inertial forces attacking it, yeah, It's going to slow down. It's like you spin a top, you touch it with your finger, it's going to slow down. Now, granted, that's a magnified force, but still the principle holds. You've got an Earth there that's spinning, and it's in a precarious situation, because if it doesn't spin exactly in 23 hours, 56 minutes, it's going to get too hot, and it's going to kill all the vegetation, because the sun's going to stay too long on one place. You see, that's the problem. It's so sensitively balanced. Okay, so not only do we have the simpler system, we have the healthier system, because that big universe that's moving around once per day, well, it's not going to stop. Nothing will be able to stop it, because it's sheer momentum that's measured by the mass of the system is nothing is going to be able to stop it, if there was something out there to stop it. Because what's outside the universe? Nothing. Okay? So we have the most stable system. That's why God made it that way. All right, 5 o'clock. What's your take on the UFO alien stuff? It's all bunk. Every bit of it. All bunk. Okay. All right, got to go. Everybody started to come in here, but I'm a little tired. Can't stay too long. All right, thanks for coming. Hope I have helped you get closer to your Lord and know him and love him and serve him. Come back next week. We'll be here and help you with even more stuff. God bless you all. Take care.